This is the nicest removable steering wheel you can get from Porsche Motorsport. Nothing else works the same. It's just nice and tight. The problem with the aftermarket ones is they don't fit properly. So what I need you to do, please, is to loosen this Allen down here on the forward one, because there are no spacers. Actually, the rearward one. And that way, maybe we can do it when I'm finished here, so don't freak out on me. But we'll be okay there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pay attention to my display. Maybe, Nick, you can get the display. The key is to not warm it up too quickly. So I've got my power on now. What I usually do is I usually leave all the breakers, as Jeff knows, in the off position. We have breakers on the center console for the 2 main fuel pumps and the 2 reserve fuel pumps. It's a good idea to leave those out. So as I energize them, you'll hear the pumps come on. As with any Porsche, and then you have no choice from 97 on, I like to push the clutch in when we start the car, because what that does is that actually takes a load off of the starter. Porsche's earliest manuals would say to push the clutch in when you start the motor, because you're separating the gearbox from the engine and there's less load on the starter. Not to mention it's safer. From 96 or 97 on, you have to push in the clutch because there's a switch at the bottom of the clutch pedal as you push it down. So I'm going to be very gentle with the RPM, and I'm going to keep it under 2,000 RPM, but I'm not going to hold it in one place. I'm actually going to rev it from idle to 1,700 to 2,000. And I'm going to monitor my display also inside the car, and I'll tell you what I'm doing. I'm going to give the starter a break. Just make sure there's no flames coming out of the tailpipes. Okay. Just let the fuel pressure, oil pressure, 5 bar, 5.8 bar. I've got lambda, which is my fuel trim on left and right. We're looking for 1, but right now we're below 1, which means we're rich. We're at about 0.8, which is perfect for cold start. My throttle angle, all drivers want me to be at 100%. I never let it go to 100%, so I'll explain that later. Our battery voltage is actually a little bit on the low side. There we go. The alternator is lazy, so it's fine. I had to rev it up a little bit to get it working. It was down around 11.5 volts, but once I revved it up, everything was okay. I'm not going to reset my fuel. Okay, fuel used for fuel remaining, don't ever trust that in a race car. You do everything through calculation. Now, if you notice, she runs a little rough when I rev her up. About right there. I don't want to keep that. I don't want to force her to do something she doesn't like. So right now, I'm just going to kind of slowly modulate my throttle. I can try my reserves. I don't know if you heard those pumps come on. I'm back on main now. Fuel pressure, oil pressure look good. Lambda's coming in spec. When we run these cars professionally, we had to run 36 millimeter restrictors. I wanted to rev it up and turn it off because I want to clean my spark plugs. When you've got to spend $1,000 for spark plug set, you don't want to ruin them. You don't want to turn them off when they're dirty, put her away wet. It's a bad idea, like with a horse. So what I'm trying to do here is talk to you about some of the items in the display, and I'm just going to cover that really quick. As I'm going through my dash, I have a button that I control, and it tells me what certain parameters are, okay? Fuel used, fuel remaining, do not trust that. Because if you trust that, you're gonna end up on the side of the track somewhere, run out of fuel. I'm not saying it doesn't work, but it doesn't work, okay? So you take that how you want. Fuel pressure, oil pressure, PF, and PO. It'll tell you in bar what you're looking at in the last display when you turn it off. Lambda, left and right, which is the actual how rich or how lean the engine's running per bank. And again, remember, we have 4 fuel pumps. We have 1 main and 1 reserve per side. So the reserve just picks up at a lower point. So, and then throttle angle. And what we do is, I like to not, I mean, all the drivers, when they have it floored, would like to have the throttle at 100%. We don't go 100% with this tag electronics. It just doesn't do that. So tag electronics is very interesting. I'm going to talk about it when I come out, but we're going to push the car forward, we're going to pick it up, and then I want to talk to you about the car some more. Now, so we have carbon fiber body panels. Now, fiberglass and carbon fiber are similar, right? They're just a woven fabric like this, but it's made out of one or the other materials. The expensive thing about the carbon fiber material is it's woven with Kevlar also to make it stronger. And then you have a resin, like a plastic liquid resin that just hardens, and you put it around it just like fiberglass and it hardens up. Another thing that makes it so expensive is that you want to bag and pull a vacuum on some of these items. But I'm not a carbon fiber specialist or composite specialist, so I'm going to stay out of that arena. So that would be cool. Now don't forget we have the mil-spec connector there. It's not going to be easy, but you'll be fine. Now, straight off, correct? And then don't let her bounce off the car. Straight up. There you go. It's not the first time that's happened. Connectors just for the lights. If you take a look at the beautiful composite work inside, I guarantee you if you could find one, you'd have to spend a minimum of 150 grand for that nose section. Probably 200. There just aren't any of them out there, and I know what they cost. When the car was new, they were 70 to 80 grand. And Porsche usually gives you a break on this kind of stuff. On the Evo car, this is a completely different layout. So if you see it with the nose off, so you don't see the headlights and you don't see the back of the door or the back of this pod section, you can't tell. But this pin has actually, they elongated the pin. So that way you can tell that it's an Evo. The radiator, Seikan radiator. That radiator right now would probably cost 50 grand. It's just a matter of finding it. That's a high quality radiator. And when I say high quality, I'm talking the best of the best that Porsche has chosen. The main thing you don't want to do is damage the fins on the radiator because it's very difficult to correct. It's laid in there horizontally. So what you do, or what Porsche's done is the air goes in through the center, comes out through the radiator and through the front hood. So we have an aerodynamic advantage with the radiator. And plus, you never, ever, ever want hot air going underneath the car. You want to keep hot air from going underneath the car. Engineers actually have argued about this some, where you definitely want some air under the car. Absolutely. You just don't want hot air under the car, or air that is really turbulent, like some from a wheelhouse liner. In '96, we had power steering problems with this car. And once we get the tail off, which I want to help them with, I'll discuss with you what happened at Las Vegas. These are pit pins. You've got to push the center of the button on the pin to pull the pin out. Because what happens, there's a little ball on the end that actually does not release until you push the center pin in, and then it's available to come off. Okay, do you guys know? Yeah, I got it. It's handled. So what you're going to do is you're going to pull the tail up at this angle, pull it off the car, and go straight up, okay? It's going to be heavy, and you're going to end up having to go vertical, and I would go that way. So this is going to be heavy. This end's heavy. So remember, up a little bit in the back, pull back, and then up from the front. It's kind of a puzzle piece how it works. There you go. Now up with the front. There you go. Hang on. Mil-spec connector. I always like to hang it, but it's going to fall off when you guys flip it around anyway. Okay, straight up with the, there you go, straight up with the front. Watch your step here. This is what's required at Le Mans, are these grates I talked about. You cannot have a clear opening from here through the back from the wheel because they're afraid of things getting thrown out. Later on, they actually required tailpipes to be turned down and not be straight out the back. And we always laughed about that as mechanics, because if you blow your engine bad enough to have a piece come out of the tailpipe like that, that's a huge problem, and I don't think you'll be going very far. Power steering. The power steering reservoir comes straight off of a 993. And so if you look at it, it's all brown. It's a phenolic material. Well, it wasn't that way. It was actually brown on the bottom, phenolic, and it was clear on the top, just like out of the 964, the 89 through 94, 911. Well, when it overheated severely, it melted the clear section on the top, and Alan McNish was complaining that he had to come in. I have to pit this lap. I have to pit this lap. And we're like, you cannot pit this lap. You need to deal with it, at least until we get some sort of an area where we can pit, because you have to pit at the correct time. Well, he was going laps and laps, and his arms were going noodly on him. He just couldn't handle it anymore. He's like, I'm going to have to come in. I can't even control the car anymore. Because when you're on the banking, you have a long area where you're having to hold the steering wheel, okay? You're fighting the car the whole time, so you need to get in more of a NASCAR position up closer and use your body. That's why they sit up so close with those cars. Well, when I noticed that the upper section was clear and it had melted, we realized that that's a weak point of that system. Now, no, are we fixing it by replacing that with all phenolic? No, we're not fixing it, but we're putting a Band-Aid on so we can run the car. Later, we learned through the 97 model that Porsche ended up putting different uprights, different wheel bearing carriers in the front, which took the caster from 8 to 12 degrees, 13 degrees. It's memory now, 20 years later. But what that did was that put an ease on the power steering. Now, one of the things I want to explain to you about how caster works is if you take any car and you turn the steering wheel, what happens? It raises the nose of the car just a little bit, affecting the aero. You're raising the nose just a little bit. Now, what's doing that? What's doing that is we have something here called the Ackerman effect. Let me explain Ackerman. If I'm going to go around a turn with a car, notice how my outer hand is moving faster than my inner hand if I'm going this way? Or if I do this, my inner hand is moving slower than my outer hand? Well, that's what this does. It turns, and I'm holding this microphone. Can you hold it for 1 second, please? So if I have my wheels and I'm going to turn the inner wheel in more. And the outer wheel doesn't have to turn as much. And that's Ackerman. That's how steering is designed. What's the difference from the 96 to the 97 cars? Very, very little. Very little. It's the caster and the bodywork. Okay? The front wheel bearing carriers, or uprights as we call them, and the bodywork. The engines were basically the same. The 98 came out with a different engine, and they had carbon intakes on them, and the engine had about 150 more horsepower. So that's a huge difference. We also, in some of the other cars, depending on which team you were with and what they got, we had a button on the steering wheel, and this is dangerous, by the way, for a driver. It was called the overtake button. It gave you more horsepower and extra boost for about 11 seconds. The problem is it's like a mouse with cheese. You want more, you want more, you want more. Eventually, I took it off the steering wheel because they never stopped pushing the button. So at one team, we actually electrified the seat where he would get shocked. I'm not kidding you. And we've done things over the years, like I'm not kidding you, we ran Kodak Developer through the fuel tank for qualifying. And people going through pit lane with this Kodak Developer, and everybody's eyes are burning as the car is running. They're like, whoa, whoa, that's amazing how bad that smells. Not sure why. So, but it ran like stink, literally. This is the 993 chassis. It actually goes all the way back. If you look through, inside it's just like your street car. It's got the tunnel with the shifter on it. It's actually the same thing. Now, Randy is here. And I'm going to ask, Randy, if you don't mind, Randy, there's one thing that I haven't forgotten, I never knew. It's got a 106 17-digit, it's a 17-digit VIN that ends in 106, but the plaque inside the car says 108, right, Randy?
Yeah, that's right. It's race car number 108, but it's sort of donor tub 106. That means it's the 6th chassis completed, and then in the lineup of bodies in white that were available to sacrifice for a race car, it became the 8th race car, 8th customer car.
So remember the story I told about the cars going down the assembly line, same thing you would buy, and they just went off to this side chute, and those would be the race cars. It's the same chassis. So yes, it got a full cage, okay, but it's the same chassis. So if you look up here, this is VIN number 106. That's the actual VIN that would have been on the street car, but it's 108 race car. Tell me that's not cool. I mean, I don't know. I'm the only one getting chills in this room, because the thing is that no other car does this. I can talk about Corvette, I can talk about Ford, all these other cars that are actually tube frame cars, purpose-built race cars, as we say, instead of a street car. So then we have our carbon fiber enclosed fuel cell. Now, if you ever look at a fuel cell on a car, it better have plenty of strength around it from a roll cage, because I've seen it before at a track, and it's not pretty when a car gets into an accident and breaks the fuel cell. Sweet Savage, Indy, I mean, you go back years, and this is the technology that we're looking for, that we've learned on. Proper suspension, upper and lower A-arms. We didn't have this on a race car. All the 993 street cars were, the suspension we ran minus the compliant rubber is what we had to deal with, because we had bump steer issues, meaning every time the car went into bump, meaning this item right here went up, we would end up gaining or losing toe. It would change it would be like the driver unintentionally steering, which is exactly what happened. We've got our fuel pumps, we have our brake master cylinder reservoirs. Why are there two? Because one feeds the front master cylinder, one feeds the rear, the rear of the car, or the front braking. Because what they had, and what they have, is you have the brake pedal with a rod, you have the master cylinders front and rear. Now, let's say you want to have more bias towards the front, you turn the knob and the pivot goes more towards the front, so that bar, call it a balance bar, actually pushes on the front more. So the driver can actually request through his control more brake bias for the front or the rear. We have our fueling. We can actually reverse these depending on the direction of the track. We could have fueling, main fueling on one side and vent on the other, or vice versa. All we had to do was go into the cell and change our foam around. And we have blocks in there to limit the amount of fuel going into the car. We have to limit it to 100 liters. Because if you ever win a race or go to tech and qualifying or whatever, they go in and they measure the amount of fuel. We had to drain the fuel every time. They want to make sure they only get so much out. Unlike a smoky unit car, where they take out the fuel tank and he's like, screw you, and he drives back to his garage with no tank in it. I mean, that's where he hid fuel in the car, okay? Because the more fuel we have, the less pit stops we have to make, right? So that guy was brilliant. Heated windscreen, yes, it's out of a Speedster, but it's got a carbon fiber frame bonded to the windscreen. We've got Trident fasteners from Tridair, an aircraft company, which are ratcheting fasteners. Again, the 993 chassis stops here. It's just the bottom of it. And then we've got a cage that actually wraps around on the bulkhead, and these triangular pieces actually are part of that roll cage, and that's what holds the back on. Now, you're wondering where all the strength is. It's also in this 962, 956 gearbox assembly, and if you look, it's very similar, but it's got 996 numbers. So when this car came out in 96, what happened in 97? We got the new car, the Boxster, and it had 9x6 numbers, basically, 996, 986. This is 996 and 96. And we didn't know what 996 meant. We just figured it was the new group of numbering coming out, until we learned that that's the new Porsche in 98 for the 911. This car had, this is so hilarious. Every time I hear a driver say that, I know it's the worst possible handling car there is. If they ever come in and they go, it's diabolical, and I'm like, oh God, that's evil. So if they ever say it's diabolical, then I know it's the worst handling race car there is. This car was diabolical with the sack shocks we had on it. instead of trying to make the sack shocks work, put them on a dyno and run them and try to get our curves proper and our pressures proper, we put JRZs on the car. Jan, who came from Coney, came up with his own shocks out of the Netherlands or somewhere in Holland, and there were incredible shocks. Now, shocks can make or break a race car, and usually what I do is I'll send my engineer out on the track like I did at Sebring, and Lex Carson from Moton. I ran Motons, which are an offshoot of this. It's another guy. You know, people leave companies and then they open up their own lines and whatnot. Moton's what I used. I sent Lex out and Sebring, which is the worst possible track. If you can get your suspension dialed in for Sebring, you can win that race. And I had Hurley Haywood and Joel Reiser and Craig Stanton in the car, and we got second. And I got to tell you, shocks are everything, especially through turn 17. That's the worst turn in the world. Okay, so Pinkel came up with these axles. This is a tripod axle, meaning it's got 3 points inside, kind of like the Eldorado Cadillac. I know that sounds like a joke, but it's real. There's Krytox grease in these. We had to be very careful because it causes cancer. I mean, severely bad. Krytox is IndyCar stuff. It's great, but it's terrible for the body, so you can't let it touch your skin. So when I repacked the axles, we'd use gloves and masks and everything, but it's the best. Kenny Hill from Metalore out of near my area is who helped Pinkel build a lot of this drivetrain. CP Products also is involved in that. I think they own them now. Got a sway bar. People often wonder how a sway bar works. All it does is it connects this tire to that tire. It's all linkage, that's all it is. And as one goes down, it tries to force the other one down, or as this one goes up, it tries to force that one up, or keep them together. And what you have here is a blade, and as that blade gets turned on end, that sway bar is stiffer. It doesn't want to bend. And as you turn it flat, it will bend. It has compliance in it. We have Inconel exhaust. Inconel is a very hard material. It's heavy and it's hard. It's mostly out of nickel. It's got a lot of chrome in it. And what we like about it is it retains heat. You want to keep the exhaust as hot as possible, because the hotter the exhaust, the faster it flows. And you want to get those pulses out, because as that does that, it creates a scavenging effect, right? And sucks the exhaust out of the motor, almost like a turbocharger in the exhaust. The gearbox, as Brad Kettler said, is industrial. It's like a G50. It's similar to your G50 and your 87 and later cars. All the technologies come from there. And but this is a G96, but believe it or not, it's very similar. The 96 and 97 cars had a rod for the shifting, and we later in the 98 went to a cable shifting car. This is a sway bar adjustment. We weren't allowed to have sway bars internally adjustable by the driver. We had to put them external of the car. So Porsche built these adjustable sway bars, and you could reach in and adjust them in the front. Now, if you have a stiffer car in the front, what does that do? It makes it push. Of course, race team mechanic, you know. So when you stiffen the back of the car, you're going to get more tail happy. You're going to work the tires more. So what we used to do was we used to monitor, dig into the tire, measure the temperatures here, here, and here. And what we would do is we would know if we have too much camber, too little camber. If it's hotter in here, we have too much camber. And if it's hotter out here, we have too, and it can be toe also, how much it's towed in, this whole wheel, this whole tire. And then what you can do is you can add up all the numbers in the back, and you can add up all the numbers in the front, and you know if the front of the car is working more than the back of the car or vice versa. This isn't just an inanimate object. There's something to a car. And you can say what you want, but if you sit in this car for a little while, you're going to get feelings from it. Or if you sit back, if I do a pre-purchase inspection on a car, and I think it might be my subconscious just showing me things, and I don't see it yet, but if I just sit back, and this is so crazy, I don't even know why we're filming this. I sit back for a little while on a pre-purchase inspection, and I just look at the car. I'm not saying I get feelings, but you get things from the car. Okay, so this is the same way. And they all have character, and I've driven, I don't know how many Porsches, let's go with hundreds, since I was a young man. And every one of them feels different, and some feel stronger than others. And nowadays, there's not a lot I can do for a tune-up. I can replace an air filter, I can replace, there's not fuel filter anymore. There's only so much I can do. Spark plugs and air filter. And people go, oh my God, it runs so much better. Well, yeah, I drove it hard. And I'm honest with them. I went out and I floored it. You know, I got on a straightaway and I floored it in first gear until the rev limiter hit. And then I shifted and I did it again. And they need that. Not just this, but they're derived from that. And I got to stop because I'm getting chills again because it's the same chassis off the assembly line.